Okay, shalom, shalom, everybody. Hope you all had a good break. And we're going to jump straight into Yeshayahu 1, from 1 to 27. Might as well read to the end, it makes sense. Only an extra couple of verses, but okay, let's get going.
The vision of Yeshayahu, son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Yehuda and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziyahu, Jotham, Ahaz, Chizkiyahu, sovereigns of Yehuda. Hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth, for Yahweh has spoken. I have reared and brought up children, but they have transgressed against me. An ox knows its owner, and a donkey its master's crib. Israel does not know, my people have not understood. Alas, sinning nation, a people loaded with crookedness, a seed of evildoers, sons acting corruptly. They have forsaken Yahweh, they have provoked the set-apart one of Israel, they went backward. Why should you be stricken any more? You continue in apostasy. All the head is sick, and all the heart faints. From the sole of the foot to the head there is no soundness in it. Wounds and bruises and open sores. They have not been closed or bound up or soothed with ointment. Your land is laid waste, your cities are burned with fire, strangers devour your land in your presence, and it is laid waste, as overthrown by strangers. And the daughter of Zion is left as a booth in a vineyard, as a hut in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. Unless Yahweh of hosts had left to us a small remnant, we would have become like Sodom, we would have been made like Amorah. Hear the word of Yahweh, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the Torah of our Elohim, you people of Amorah. Of what use to me are your many slaughterings, declares Yahweh. I have had enough of ascending offerings of rams and the fat of fed beasts. I do not delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required this from your hand to trample my courtyards? Stop bringing futile offerings. Incense, it is an abomination to me. New moons, Sabbaths, the calling of gatherings, I am unable to bear unrighteousness and assembly. My being hates your new moons and your appointed times. They are a trouble to me. I am weary of bearing them. And when you spread out your hands, I hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I do not hear. Your hands have become filled with blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your doings from before my eyes. Stop doing evil. Learn to do good. Seek right ruling. Reprove the oppressor. Defend the fatherless. Plead for the widow. Come now and let us reason together, says Yahweh. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If you submit and obey, you shall eat the good of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you shall be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of Yahweh has spoken. How the steadfast city has become a whore. I have filled it with right ruling, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Your silver has become dross, your wine is mixed with water. Your rulers are stubborn and companions of thieves. Everyone loves bribes and runs after rewards. They do not defend the fatherless, nor does the cause of the widow reach them. Therefore the Master declares, Yahweh of hosts, the mighty one of Israel. Ah, I shall be eased of my adversaries, and I shall be avenged of my enemies. And I shall turn my hand against you, and shall refine your dross as with lye, and shall remove all your alloy. And I shall give back your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. After this you shall be called the city of righteousness, a steadfast city. Zion shall be ransomed with right ruling, returning ones with righteousness. And the destruction of transgressors and of sinners is together, and those who forsake Yahweh shall be consumed, for they shall be ashamed of the terebinth trees which you have desired. And you shall be embarrassed because of the gardens which you have chosen, for you shall be as a terebinth whose leaf fades, and as a garden that has no water. The strong shall be for tow, and his work for a spark, and both shall burn together, with no one to extinguish.
Okay, the book of Yeshayahu is indeed a very powerful book. I always say that you can put it parallel or alongside the book of Chazon because they are both a reflection of the revelation of the deliverance of our Master along with the destruction of the wicked that's being declared. And what the book of Yeshayahu reveals for us today is the need to embrace the saving favor of Yahweh. And we also know the prophet Yeshayahu, his name clearly declares Yeshayahu, meaning the salvation of Yahweh. Yah is he who saves. And we would do well to still heed the words of prophecy contained in this book. Our Master himself, when he was in the flesh, said to the Pharisees that Yeshayahu spoke well when spoke of you hearing but not hearing, seeing but not perceiving. And so when we look at this call for set-apart lives, as we walk in the light of Yahweh, we see this call, and what's beginning this book is being made louder and louder and louder. And the question remains, we ended going through the Torah portion about asking the question, am I listening? But the question remains, who will hear and who is dull of hearing? This chapter actually presents, opening this book, the urgency and need to hear the word of Yahweh and walk in the Torah, which are our Master's instructions for righteous living. And this vision and call that Yeshayahu was given here in this chapter was not only for Yehuda back then, but it's so important as we understand these visions among many that he got, and the word that's still alive for the entire bride of Yeshua Messiah today. It carries so much significance for us, especially as we understand the book of Hosea and a reference to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the 10 tribes of Ephraim, who are to have ears to diligently be returning to this call, to come out, be separate, be cleansed. And so when we look at these elements that are contained in this chapter, we can see valuable lessons that we can see that's still very applicable to us today, and how urgent it is for people to either hear lest they find themselves being consumed in the wrath of Yahweh. And so when we start this book, we've got to understand at this point in history, the northern 10 tribes, the house of Israel, they'd already been scattered, and they still yet to return. Our Master came in the flesh many centuries later and said, I've come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because that's a covenant people that he's coming to redeem and to restore. And this is what we see happening in these last days as Ephraim is returning. As we look at the book of Hosea, it's being led into the wilderness where Yahweh is speaking tenderly to her. He's striving with the whore that brought Israel up, and is hearing the words of the Master, calling on her husband, a true redeemer, and stripping away all falsehood and getting cleaned up. Now, the house of Yehuda was not innocent at this stage either. They had committed just as much whoring, if not more, than the house of Israel. And so in many ways, they were actually worse than the house of Israel. And here in this beginning of this vision, of many visions that Yeshayahu was given, there's an urgent call to listen up, and it's being given directly from Yahweh through this prophet. Yeshayahu was given this vision concerning Yehuda and Jerusalem during the reigns of Uzziyahu, Yotham, Achaz, Chizkiyahu. These were the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th sovereigns of the house of Yehuda. Yehuda would have 19 sovereigns, so after these events, there would still be another 7 sovereigns. So just to kind of put it into context, other prophets of Elohim that prophesied during these reigns were Amos, Hosea, Yonah, Micha. So it brings into perspective the words that Yahweh was sending around the same time. It's not like these far stretched out words that were coming over periods of time. Yahweh had a number of his prophets that he was sending, and people were still not listening. And so just to give a bit of perspective is to show how Yeshayahu was shown that which concerned Jerusalem and Yehuda. We take note. He says he received a vision that he saw concerning Uzziyahu, Yotham, Achaz. Uzziyahu reigned for 52 years. Yotham reigned for 16 years. Achaz reigned for 16 years, and Chizkiyahu reigned for 29 years. So do yourself a little bit of math. Yeshayahu prophesied a long time. Okay, might not have been the full 52 years of Uzziyahu, but certainly began in the days when Uzziyahu was reigning, and the visions came for all the other reigns. I mean, add 16, 29, he prophesied for a long time. eventually was put to death by the wicked King Manasseh, son of Chizkiyahu. And so during this time, the house of Israel had the reign of the last 7 sovereigns before being divorced. So Israel had, during this time, 7 sovereigns as well that were coming during these versions before they were then divorced. And that was they were taken into captivity by the Ashurians in the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, the last sovereign of the house of Israel, which was the 6th year of the reign of Chizkiyahu. So what we see is, while he was still given visions concerning Yehuda and Jerusalem, starting in the days of Yeshayahu, the house of Israel was not yet divorced, but they got divorced during the 6th year of Chizkiyahu, which was the last sovereign that Yeshayahu was prophesying during, before Chizkiyahu's son Manasseh, who reigned for 55 years, put Yeshayahu to death and actually cut him in half. Okay, so just giving you a bit of perspective of how long this prophet had to speak. In Yeshayahu 6, which we looked at not so long ago, when he saw Yahweh in the heavens and he declared that he's unclean and his lips were touched with a coal, one of the cherubim from the slaughter place of Yahweh, and Yahweh asked the question, who'll go for me? And Yeshayahu says, here I am. And he was told to go and speak to a people that aren't hearing, that aren't perceiving. How long? Until destruction comes. So here's a wonderful lesson on the endurance of Yeshayahu, who had to speak when nobody wanted to listen and keep speaking. I mean, how many of you think you could endure all these years, different sovereigns, depravity after depravity after depravity? I mean, during Chizkiyahu, certainly a bit of times of maybe glimpses of hope, or even in Uzziyahu, bit of, some of these sovereigns of Yehuda had some good qualities, but then they'd fall back and the rest of the people were falling away. No true restoration was being seen during these days, although there were elements of it, but not yet the proper fruition of obedience. And here in this verse 2, we see the clear call, hear, O heavens, and listen, O earth. Now, this phrase should have sounded very familiar to a covenanted people. And why I say it should have, because this phrase was actually alluding to, is that the right word to say? Referring back to the song that Moshe sang, or the song of Moshe in Shemot 15, after Pharaoh and the army was destroyed in the Sea of Reeds. And he was instructed to teach this song to Israel, and it needed to be passed down through the generations, showing us that they should have known these words. Despite the fact that they should have known them, they weren't paying close attention to them. So the very things that Moshe warned about were now coming to pass. And these opening words were very vivid and sober reminders of where they were heading if they did not repent. They were already gone astray, but the whoring and apostasy that they were now in was only going to lead to death unless they got cleaned up. And the opening statement given for a call for the heavens and earth to bear witness of the true words and clear words of Elohim is an opening statement that's found in Devarim 32 verse 1, where we see the similar phrase where it says, give ear, O heavens, and let me speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. This is a powerful opening statement of a song that's set before us, identifying 2 permanent witnesses of Yahweh and his Torah. The heavens and the earth bear witness of the very voice of Yahweh as given at Mount Sinai and given through Moshe and his prophets that he would send. These are the permanent witnesses to the word of Yahweh. And therefore, by these 2 unchangeable witnesses, we see the word of Elohim stands firm forever and will not return void. Until then, and when he comes to establish his reign, destroy Satan, get into the renewal, his Torah is established and it has never been set aside as not applicable. The permanent witnesses of the word of Yahweh that was being called to bear witness of was a clear call that was given to a disobedient people to trigger their memory of whose people they're supposed to be and what they are now. They are not what they're supposed to be. Devarim 4 verse 26 says, I shall call the heavens and the earth to witness against you on that day, so that you completely perish from the land which you pass over the Jordan to possess. You do not prolong your days in it, but are completely destroyed. I mean, here, with these opening words, should have taken them back to the words of warning that's given in Devarim. Again, in Devarim 30, verse 19, it says, I have called the heavens and the earth as witnesses today against you. I have set before you life and death, and the blessing and the curse. Therefore you shall choose life, so that you live, both you and your seed. So the primary hope, or the primary purpose for Yeshayahu and all the other prophets that Yahweh would send to his people, was for them to choose life, because their actions were clearly showing that they were choosing death. And this song of Moshe that was supposed to be passed down from generation to generation was clearly being spoken by Yeshayahu. So it was passed down to a point where even Yeshayahu, the prophet, could be speaking it, which means the entire nation should have had ears to hear and get back to stop rebelling against Yahweh and get back to obedience. And so this call to hear, we understand Shama, to hear, Shamar, to guard. You hear with the purpose of doing. And as I said earlier, Shaul warned about the last days, people wanting their ears tickled, not really wanting to hear the truth. You know, people want to have the appearance of hearing. So they might show up for an event or two, maybe write a few words down to look like they're busy taking notes, and but not really paying attention. They're not giving ear. Now, this is a call, give ear, the heavens and the earth, because the people aren't listening. So now it's a reminder of the song, because Yahweh's calling the two permanent witnesses that he said would witness against them because they're not listening. Now that time had actually come. The days that Moshe was speaking about was right in front of them. And this was a very sobering moment, I think, for many, or hopefully it was. This was a reality check that was being given to a nation that is supposed to be set apart. Declaring once again that Yahweh's covenant was still in effect, and it always is in effect. He never operates outside of his covenant. The rebellious people who are rebelling against the covenant will result in their death. Yahweh had risen up, he delivered a nation, taught them his ways, and stubborn, rebellious people rebelled against him, and they rejected the marriage covenant that they said yes to. Now it says here, for Yahweh has spoken. I just want to touch on that because it's very important. This is like, if any statement was being made, it's not like Yahweh says, it's Yahweh has spoken. You haven't listened. The Hebrew text is ki Yahweh deber. And it is really literally Yahweh has spoken. And the heavens and earth bear witness that Yahweh has spoken. If nobody else wants to witness the fact, oh, I didn't know that. Well, I'll tell you what, heaven and earth has heard the voice of Yahweh and he's spoken. So there's no turning back. We understand the word deber comes from davar, which is to speak, command. The book of Devarim that we started today, we know comes from that, the speech command. And I'd just like to highlight this exact phrase in the Hebrew, ki Yahweh deber, is used in the Tanakh 9 times. I just want to highlight those because then we get context. And we realize the awakening call that Yahweh is giving to a bride that he desires to be with, but does she really desire to be with him? Now, this exact phrase that I said is, if we look at each one, we can see the clear truth that Yahweh has spoken, his word has not been done away with, and anyone who claims as such is speaking total nonsense and is in for a huge awakening call at the judgment that's coming upon those who do not have ears to hear. While the sure expectation that we have in our Master will also be made complete according to the word that he's spoken and been written down for us to study and meditate upon in order to be doers of the word and not just hearers only. Now, here's the other 8 passages. Obviously, I'm not repeating this one from verse 2, but in Bamidbar, or Numbers 10, verse 29, Moshe said to Chovav, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moshe's father-in-law, we are setting out for the place of which Yahweh said, I give it to you. Come with us, and we shall do good to you, for Yahweh has spoken good concerning Israel. 1 Kings 14, verse 11, Melachim Aleph, those of Yarovam who die in the city, the dogs do eat. Those who die in the field, the birds of the heavens do eat. For Yahweh has spoken. Again, judgment language of the beast of the birds and the beasts. Yeshayahu 22, verse 25, it says, in that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, the peg that is fastened in the steadfast place shall be removed and cut down and fall, and the burden that was on it shall be cut off. for Yahweh has spoken. Yeshayahu 24 verse 3, the earth is completely emptied and utterly plundered, for Yahweh has spoken this word. Yeshayahu 25 verse 8, he shall swallow up death forever, and the Master Yahweh shall wipe away the tears from all faces and take away the reproach of his people from all the earth, for Yahweh has spoken. Yirmiyahu 13 verse 15, listen and give ear, do not be proud, for Yahweh has spoken. Yoel 3 verse 8, which is actually chapter 4 verse 8 in the Hebrew text, it says, and shall sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the people of Yehudah, and they shall sell them to the Shevaites, to a nation far off, for Yahweh has spoken. Obadiah chapter 1 verse 18 says, the house of Yaakov shall be a fire, and the house of Yosef a flame, but the house of Esau for stubble. And they shall burn among them, and they shall consume them, so that no survivor is left of the house of Esau. For Yahweh has spoken. Now, the reason for me highlighting these passages, and you can go and cross-reference those in the context of each passage to get greater insight, I'm just mentioning these passages where we see Ki Yahweh Diber, for Yahweh has spoken, is to highlight the important truth that what our Master has spoken comes to pass. Yeshayahu 55 verse 10 to 11 says, for as the rain comes down and the snow from the heavens and do not return there, but water the earth and make it bring forth and bud, and give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It does not return to me empty, but shall do what I please and shall certainly accomplish what I sent it for. So Yahweh makes it clear that he reared up children. He brought up children, they transgressed against him. You know, he caused a people to be his people, and they rebelled against him. In Lamentations, I read earlier, what should a mankind complain because of his own sin? You know, they have transgressed and rebelled against him. And Yahweh highlights their depravity in verse 3. He's saying that, listen, even an ox knows its owner. A donkey would know and recognize his master's feeding trough. But yet, you know, in other words, they would know where to get their proper food. But yet my people don't know. So where are they off in type, in a parable sense? They're off feeding themselves on folly and poison. Israel were here in type as a witness that heaven and earth were giving before them. They weren't a covenant people or that they should be. They were being reduced to being less than animals due to their lack of knowledge and obedience, because even the animals know where to find shelter, where to get food. And we are told if we have shelter, food, and covering, we shall be satisfied with these. But Israel were not satisfied with what they had in the Master, so they went looking elsewhere for things that they wanted in the flesh and had fallen away from true obedience. And so we see a wonderful picture being set before us of so many people today who are actually acting worse than animals, if you want to put it in that sense. Yehudah were not hearing. They weren't acknowledging the Master's voice. They turned their ear away from hearing the Torah, and they were turning to ear-tickling falsehood, going up to the heights, worshipping as the nations would worship. And this is what we see happening in the world today by so many people claiming to be religious, but yet that religious is not pure and set apart. Or that religion, not religious. We are given a clear call, especially in the book of Hosea, to pursue to know his word. In Hosea 6 verse 3 says, let us pursue to know Yahweh. For his going forth is as certain as the morning, and he comes to us like the rain, like the latter rain watering the earth. And as we read from Yeshayahu 55, just like the rain comes and it doesn't come back and it helps the farmer basically able to bring forth from the land, so Yahweh's word doesn't return void. So therefore, that's how our pursuit of Yahweh and the knowledge of him should be. We shouldn't be just giving up because, you know, well, it's too much work. You know, evil men, it says in Mishle 28 verse 5, do not understand right ruling, but those who seek Yahweh understand all. I often say understanding comes in the doing, and you can only do what you are correctly hearing you should do. And so if we're just going to hear and just heap up knowledge and not apply that knowledge, then we're just evil. We don't get real understanding. You know, and when I say evil, I mean dysfunctional, not operating the way we should. And so here was a nation that was supposed to be a set-apart bride, and Yahweh says a sinning nation loaded with crookedness. Now, he's not talking about the other nations that are already wicked nations. Here's a bride that's sinning, she's lawless, and she's loaded with crookedness. So here's heavy yokes and enslavement to wrong ways that this nation is now being burdened by. And it says loaded down with crookedness. It says here, and acting corruptly. They were perverting the truth. They were not serving Yahweh correctly. And by the time of Yeshua Messiah coming in the flesh of man, the Pharisees and the Sadducees had corrupted the word so much that he also referred to them as a wicked and a crooked generation. Well, he says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no other sign will be given to it except Jonah, sign of Jonah the prophet. And he left them and went away. So his words should have also taken them back to Yeshayahu 1, which should take you back to Devarim, should cause people to wake up. But when people who aren't listening to the Torah, they read Yeshayahu 1, they just think, it's just, if they ever get to it, it's just some history. Oh, shame for those guys, not realizing this is covenant language. And Yahweh is serious about covenant. And that's what I think so many people don't realize. These people had forsaken Yahweh. And when you forsake Yahweh, what do you think happens? Forsaking the Torah of Elohim is also forsaking Elohim. And I think people often don't match those two ideas together. But I want to do that for you. In Devarim, or not Devarim, sorry, Divrahayamim, 2 Chronicles 12 verse 1. This is the account of the first wicked king of the house of Yehuda, Rechavam, son of Shlomo. It came to be when Rechavam had established the reign and had strengthened himself that he forsook the Torah of Yahweh and all Israel with him. And you carry on the same chapter to verse 5, where Shemaiah the prophet came and spoke these words. It says, Shemaiah the prophet came to Rechavam and the rulers of Yehuda who had gathered in Jerusalem because of Shishak, because now they were afraid of the enemy coming to attack them, and said to them, thus said Yahweh, you have forsaken me, and therefore I also have left you in the hand of Shishak. So that's just to highlight in the same chapter that forsaking the Torah of Yahweh is forsaking Yahweh. So anybody who says they don't need the Torah is forsaking Elohim. Now think about that. A sinning nation had forsaken Yahweh. When you obey, you're seeking him. When you're sinning, you're forsaking him. And so 1 Chronicles 28 verse 9, it says, as for you, my son Shlomo, David's parting words to his son, know the Elohim of your father and serve him with a perfect heart and with a pleasing life. For Yahweh searches the hearts and understands all the intents of the thoughts. If you do seek him, he is found by you. But if you forsake him, he rejects you forever. Why aren't people listening to these words today? Again, in 2 Chronicles 15, verse 2 to 3, it says, and he went out to face Asa, and he said to him, hear me, Asa, and all Yehuda and Binyamin. Yahweh is with you while you are with him. And if you seek him, he is found by you. But if you forsake him, he forsakes you. And for many days, Israel was without the true Elohim, and without a Torah priest, and without Torah. Because when you're without Torah, you're without Elohim. So the guarding of the commands and the possessing of the witness of who's with you go hand in hand. And when you forsake the need to obey the Torah, you're forsaking Yeshua Messiah and the witness that you are to possess in him. Both of these accounts that I just read from Chronicles witness the truth that if we seek Yahweh, we are found by him. It's not that he's lost, but he's desiring that we seek him and know him. Israel had forgotten, and without the Torah, you can't properly seek Yahweh. That's the bottom line. So here's another thing that I'll again establish. If you're not hearing the Torah every Shabbat, your eyesight is going to grow dim. Our Master in Elohim told us that he is the true vine, which we'll look at shortly, and we are the branches. And if we stay in him, he stays in us. So that means if we don't stay in him, he doesn't stay in us, because not staying in him is forsaking him. And when they forsook Yahweh, always sounds weird when I say forsook. It says they provoked Yahweh. In other words, they despised his Torah, and by despising his Torah, by not adhering to it and submitting to it or mixing it and corrupting it, they were actually blaspheming him. You know, I mentioned a word earlier, na'at, and that was for despised. So here again, it's translated as provoked, because to provoke Yahweh is to treat him with scorn, to blaspheme, to treat the word as not relevant. And in doing so, provoking Yahweh, forsaking him, they went backwards, which is an obvious. This is maths. When you don't seek Yahweh, you're going backwards. Isn't that just a natural progression? And so Yahweh says to him, listen, how long? No, it's maths in my head. You know, 1 + 1 = 2, you know. I almost said 3. Okay. But back to serious matters here. This sinning nation, loaded with crookedness, couldn't go forward. They would never put their hand to the plow and go forward. They were going backwards. And Yahweh appeals to them here in verse 5. He's basically saying, why do you continue to be beaten down? Why? Why do you keep disobeying? You're continuing in apostasy. Now, the English word of apostasy means a renunciation of one's belief and an abandonment to loyalty. And that's what Yehuda had done. We get our English word apostasy from the Greek word apostasia, which means a falling away, which we see being used in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3 when it says, let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away, the apostasy or apostasia, is to come first, and the man of lawlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction. So it's not a case of we waiting for the lawless one to be revealed. Oh, we didn't know it was him. The falling away is going to take place before that happens. Now, the Hebrew word in Yeshayahu 1 verse 5 for apostasy carries a powerful witness of what bride we're supposed to be and what Israel were. Because the root word that's used here for apostasy is Sarah. But it's spelt with a Samek, a Resh, and a Hey, sounding very similar to the wife of Abraham, Sarah, but hers is with a Sin, a Resh, and a Hey. Now, Sarah, Abraham's wife, her name means princess or noblewoman, and it's a reflection of a pure royal bride, a bride in covenant. This is what Israel was supposed to be, but Yahweh is saying, you are not Sarah, you are Sarah. Play on words here, because you've fallen away from how he had adorned them and made them fit for royalty. But now look at you, loaded with crookedness. I mean, this is the state that Yeshayahu was called to go and proclaim. You know? And so he keeps telling them, from your foot to your head, you are sick. So when I think of foot to head or head to foot, I kind of think of my mind at times goes to the armor of Elohim and the helmet of deliverance, fitted about and ready with the good news of the peace. So we understand the garments of the high priest, no shoes in the tabernacle, because take off your sandals, for what you're standing on is set apart ground, which Moshe was told, Yehoshua was told. We know the priests didn't have sandals in their service in the tabernacle. So you get this idea about shoes of peace. So from the head to the foot, the way they were walking was in rebellion, was not in peace, but it was in rebellion. And they were not guarding their minds in set apart matters. They'd opened themselves up to be whatever goes. So here is a clear picture of one that's being stripped of any armor whatsoever, and the enemy having free rein with lies and deception to cause them to fall away. And when one doesn't receive a love for the truth, Yahweh hands you over to the delusion that you believe the lie. At this stage, Yehuda believed that they were okay. And he's sending his prophet to say, you're not okay, you're sick. Your land is laid waste, your cities are destroyed, you're left as a garden hut. Now, garden huts were necessary during harvest times to make sure that people weren't coming and stealing the crops and things like that. But being left as a garden hut in the midst of a garden, a vineyard, or a booth in a vineyard, a hut in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city, which means you get this picture of, it's not this very flourishing field of cucumbers or lots of grapes on the vine. This is no fruit whatsoever. All that's there is a hut, but the hut's got no purpose because nothing to guard. Broken down. And you basically are destroyed, but this is the appeal. Yahweh says, but a remnant's been left. Unless Yahweh left a remnant, you'd be like Sodom and Gomorrah. And he's calling, listen, Sodom, give ear, Gomorrah. Our master gives parables. He's saying, it will be better than Chorazin and what was the other cities? Bethsaida. It would be better for you better for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for you. Because here Messiah was in the flesh and they were rejecting him. Of what use are your many slaughterings? I don't want junk. That's what Yahweh was basically saying. You know what? Does he delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of goats? Remember the words that Shemuel spoke to the wicked King Shaul? Yahweh desires obedience over slaughtering. Slaughterings are part of obedience, but we must understand and get the right order. A lot of people have twisted these words in Yeshayahu 1 to their own destruction when they use these verses where it says, my being hates your new moons and your appointed times. They are trouble to me. And a lot of people today, especially those that are still in a corrupted, lawless state, use these passages. It's been used against me to say, you see, Yahweh's not interested in you trying to keep the Sabbath and the feast. You're just doing the work, the letter of the law, and you know what? You don't have the grace because look here, he doesn't like your new moons and your feasts anymore. And it just shows you how twisted they are. What Yahweh was saying to an apostate bride is the way you're serving me is not service. So what you've turned his appointed times into is not his appointed times. So it's become yours. And when you do things your own way and follow your own patterns, it's not Yahweh's, and Yahweh hates that. Because he says, stop bringing futile offerings. Because when you're trying to draw near to Yahweh, but you're doing it in a man-constructed state, it's futile. It's not received. You're wasting time. And here's a very clear passage in verse 13. I am unable to bear unrighteousness and assembly. When we are to gather to our master, we are to gather in complete standard of righteousness, which is guarding his word. There are people gathering all over the world today in whatever fashion and shape and form, but disregarding his Torah and the guarding of his commands, which is a work of unrighteousness. And Yahweh says, I cannot bear that. I hate your appointments. And it might have even been on the Sabbaths and the feasts. The new moons are the new moons, so it would have been the same time. But it's not like Yahweh saying we mustn't watch for the new moon, we mustn't guard his Sabbaths and feasts. He's saying when you've turned it into something that which he has not prescribed, then it's not his anymore. Vayikra 23, Leviticus 23 says these are the appointed times of Yahweh. So here Yahweh is saying your appointments I don't like.
I mean, it could be doing what he prescribes with the wrong motive.
The wrong motives, yes. That's what I'm saying. It can even be on the same days.
They were doing it.
Yes.
Still going to the temple, but they weren't set apart.
No. They were mixing with the nations. And that's why I think sometimes, let's put it in today's perspective. Some people might show up for a Shabbat if they feel like it, but in the rest of the week, they're just like the nations. And that's what Yahweh's saying. What is the Shabbat then to you? Because you're coming in a mixed state. You're not being set apart in your life. Then how can you set apart the Sabbath? You know? When you spread out your hands, I hide my eyes. Wow. Think about that. Stop bringing futile worship. That's really the call here. Stop mixing any assumed worship unto Yahweh with paganism. Because Israel and Yehudah were both affected by the nations that they were supposed to destroy. And they didn't destroy them. And as Yahweh warned, they would become problems to them. So here we see a clear Yahweh is unable to bear righteousness in assembly. And the Hebrew word for unrighteousness comes from the root word aven, which means wickedness, trouble, sorrow, and is translated in Scripture also as idol. And a rebuke was given here for the idolatry that was being displayed because they'd made idol worship out of a lot of things. And Beit El, Yahweh had in his prophets said, is Beit Aven, house of sin, house of idolatry. So those that think they're in the house of El are actually in the house of idolatry. You know, Yehuda was wicked. They were pretending to be righteous and refused to walk in the Torah. And so when he says in verse 15, you can spread out your hands. I'm not listening to you. Just listen to a couple of the verses. I read from Tehillah 50 before lunch what the wrong, what right you have you to take his Torah. Mishle 15 verse 8 to 9 says, the slaughtering of the wrong ones is an abomination to Yahweh, but the prayer of the straight is his delight. The way of the wrong one is an abomination to Yahweh, but he loves him who pursues righteousness. Mishle 28 verse 9 says, he who turns his ear away from hearing the Torah, even his prayer is an abomination. This is a severe warning against turning one's ear away from hearing the Torah. Any prayers that you might think you're offering up are not done in set apartness. They're abominable in the eyes or ears of Yahweh. They become a stench before him. And so he's then saying, this is your state. And this is very clear, you are dirty. Wash yourselves and get clean. There's a responsibility. He will do the cleansing, but you've got to acknowledge your dirt. Because when we confess, he's faithful and just to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. But we've got to acknowledge, and that's the biggest problem people have, is acknowledging that they're wrong. And Yahweh says, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, put away the evil of your doings, or your evil of your, evil of your doings, yes, and stop doing evil. Put away the evil of your doing, stop doing evil, okay? Evil, people are clinging to the evil, but they're shrinking from what is good. And Shaul tells us to shrink from the evil and cling to what is good. In fact, in the prophets, that Yehuda is described as clinging to the evil and doing it well. In actual fact, people are doing their corrupt worship very well because they're putting in a lot of effort. But it's a waste of time. And he says, come on, let's reason together. Here he's using court-like language. The judge has spoken. Now the accused is standing before him. His bride is accused of adultery, of whoring, of apostasy, falling away. And he's saying, now I've presented how you are. Now let's reason. And if you come and you accept the state that I've declared you are in and get cleaned up, because then you will be clean. Then that which was corrupted, I'll take it away. And if you submit and obey, you're going to live. You're going to eat the good of the land. The land isn't going to be destroyed as it is before you right now. The enemies aren't going to come and destroy you. You're going to flourish and be fruitful. But if you rebel, you're going to get devoured by the very sword. Eat or be eaten is the simple thing here. And he said, this steadfast city has now become a whore, not steadfast anymore. He filled it with right ruling and righteousness, but what's there now? Murderers. Dross of silver. They'd mixed. Silver is a picture of redemption. Here was a people that were redeemed from Mitzrayim, delivered by our master. And what they were supposed to be to a light to the nations had actually just become nothing more than a corrupted presentation of whoring. And so here we see Yahweh saying, this is how you are, but Zion will be ransomed because his word does not return void. And it will be ransomed with right ruling. In other words, the only way that he ransoms a people that need to be redeemed is according to his righteous right rulings. And that's why he even came according to the Torah to suffer on our behalf. So that according to the Torah, we actually may have access back into a covenant, having been cleaned up and now being on guard to keep our garments clean. The destruction of transgressors and of sinners are together. Now to transgress is to sin. Okay, it's just, I think the wording here is clear because some people think I haven't sinned when they're transgressing, or, vice versa. They kind of try and use technicalities to say, but a transgressor is a sinner and they'll all be destroyed together. And those who forsake Yahweh shall be consumed. So forsaking Yahweh is to sin, is to transgress. So you know what? You're going to be consumed. You're going to be destroyed. And you'll be ashamed of the terebinth trees, the mighty trees. People put their trust in their own work of their hands. And so here we see this opening chapter. What an intro into a number of years that lay ahead of him. The Yeshayahu was to go and call people It just shows you, you can speak to people today. It's not like they're going to get cleaned up tomorrow. This took a number of years, and still there was a number of sovereigns after them that Yehuda still went into captivity because they wouldn't listen. Eventually, Yirmiyahu, one of the last prophets, they didn't want to listen to. So some might say, what's the point of listening to the prophets? The point is Yahweh said so, and his word doesn't return void. And even if it is only the remnant few that are believing, like the prophets that Yahweh sent, not the false prophets, believing his word and standing firm and having the courage to stand up and speak what is right, who maybe even in their lifetimes didn't get to see the fruition of the words that they were called to speak. That's why Yeshua says the prophets in your day long to see what you see. Because we're living in a time that's approaching the end, where the prophets who were prophesying about what's coming never got to see it, but they stood firm. How much more courage should we have, knowing what they suffered for righteousness' sake for? As he says, blessed are you when you're persecuted for righteousness' sake, because just as they persecuted the prophets who were before you, so they will persecute you. So the clear lesson that we've got to ask ourselves is, are we up for the challenge? To get cleaned up, to learn to do good. Now, to learn to do good means you've got to study. I mean, let's just call it what it is. The Hebrew word for learn, lamad, means to instruct, teach, train, to exercise in. You've got to actually get with the program. And you've got to start doing the word. In order to do the word, you've got to be listening to the instructions. Don't just do whatever you think is right, but you've got to actually submit somewhere first, where Yahweh's appointed, and learn how to do. And as you learn how to do good, you will grow. And in that learning to do good comes with the process of seeking right ruling. You don't forsake it. You want to know the right way to live so that you can reprove the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. Because if you're not learning to do good and you're not seeking right ruling, how can you actually stand up for those that don't have anybody to stand up for them? Because the fatherless and the widow don't have a head over them to defend them. And that's why it's saying this is what a body should be. But only those who are actually able and equipped in the word to defend the fatherless and plead for the widow can only do according to the right ruling of his word and not twist the word. Shaul goes into detail with Timotheus and Titus what the qualifications are, the correct qualifications for widows, etc., and what we should be on guard against. The point of the matter is that Yahweh is saying, this is time to get cleaned up. Your sins have made your garments terrible. But it's only the blood of Messiah that can take away the sin. And so when we consider these words of Yeshayahu, I'm always encouraged by the courage of this prophet that Yahweh called, and calling people to submit and obey is not an easy task. When you see, I don't know how many of you find at times the echa, the lamentations of Yirmiyahu, how this city is laid in ruins. I mean, this was a number of years later. Yeshayahu never failed in his commission and call. It's the people failed to listen. So we mustn't base our success on people's reactions. Our success is seen in our obedience to Yahweh, to doing his word. And that's what we must stick to. The reality is, most of the time, you're not going to get a favorable response. But knowing that up front should give us the courage to not get caught by surprise, but actually be diligent in seeking Yahweh and his strength to do all. Amen? Any thoughts on this passage? It is a powerful opening to this book, calling people to a deliverance that they can only get in Yahweh. Then we can go to Yoḥanan chapter 15.
I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me that bears no fruit he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit he prunes, so that it bears more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Stay in me, and I stay in you. As the branch is unable to bear fruit of itself unless it stays in the vine, so neither you unless you stay in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who stays in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, because without me you are able to do naught. If anyone does not stay in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you stay in me and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. In this my Father is esteemed, that you bear much fruit, and you shall be my taught ones. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love. These words I have spoken to you, so that my joy might be in you, and that your joy might be complete.
I'm going to ask you, I know what you're going to. You know what I'm going to ask you.
To the end.
No, not to the end. I would like you to read Ezekiel 15. Ezekiel 15. It's only 8 verses. It's probably less than what's at the end of Yoḥanan 15. Yeah, it's 8 verses.
Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Son of man, how is the vine tree better than any tree, the vine branch that has been among the trees of the forest? Is wood taken from it to be made into any work? Do they take a peg from it to hang any vessel on? See, into the fire it shall be given for fuel. Both ends of it the fire shall burn, and its middle shall be scorched. Is it fit for any work? See, when it was intact, it was not made for work. How much less when the fire has burned it, and it is scorched, shall it still be used for work? Therefore thus said the Master Yahweh, As the vine tree among the trees of the forest, which I have given to the fire for fuel, so I shall give up the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I shall set my face against them. They shall go out from fire, but fire consumes them. And you shall know that I am Yahweh, when I set my face against them. And I shall make the land a wasteland, because they committed a trespass, declares the Master Yahweh.
Okay, so main reason that I wanted to read those 2 chapters together is because I do find it so important that we do read them in the context of the vine, or the true vine, and the degenerate vine that we see being contrasted as 2 separate pictures in Scripture as a clear encouragement and warning given to us. You know, when one goes through the prophets of Yeshayahu, we just started Yeshayahu 1, and you look at Yirmiyahu and Yechezkiel, it becomes more evident in our day how alive the word of Yahweh is for us, and how we are to guard our lives against having fruitless lifestyles, which are simply lives that are lawless. And having a lawless life is going to face judgment one day of our Master. And Yechezkiel also received many visions and signs and announced the soon coming judgment that was coming upon Jerusalem and all its inhabitants. And Yahweh made it very clear in his word that his people, if his chosen people rebelled against him by forsaking his ways, his commands and right rulings, if they neglected to walk in his Torah and turned after following him, then he'd bring a great and devastating judgment upon them, turned away from him. Yes. And in this judgment that's being given to us in Yechezkiel 15. If I look at Yechezkiel 15, Ezekiel 15, and Yoḥanan or John 15, I kind of see collectively we're given a parable of the vine. And the question is, fruitful or fruitless? And so Yechezkiel 15 is almost like it's the parable of the fruitless vine, and Yoḥanan 15 is the parable of the fruitful vine. And so it's a parable of judgment that we see being given in Yechezkiel 15, and what is to come as a result of having no fruit in one's life, fruitless living. Jerusalem had stopped bearing the fruit of righteousness, and so in effect they'd become worthless. And despite all the warnings that they were given to walk in righteousness, they continued in their apostasy. And they had considered themselves as being the vine of Yahweh's blessing. They did not produce spiritual fruit that Yahweh had designed and intended for them to be bearing. They had simply followed other ways. They had forsaken his ways. Israel had departed from staying in Yahweh, and so he was now calling judgment upon them. And so we see a couple of passages that I like to, in terms of vines and vineyards. Yeshayahu 5 says, please let me sing to the one I love, a song for my loved one regarding his vineyard. My loved one has a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vine and built a watchtower in its midst, and also made a winepress in it. And he waited for the yielding of grapes, but it yielded rotten ones. And now, O inhabitant of Jerusalem and man of Yehuda, please judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why, when I waited for you the yielding of grapes, did it yield rotten ones? And now, please let me inform you what I'm doing to my vineyard, to take away its hedge, and it shall be burned, to break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. And I lay it waste. It is not pruned or dug, and thorn bushes and weeds shall come up. And I command the clouds not to rain on it. For the vineyard of Yahweh of hosts is the house of Israel. And the man of Yehuda is his pleasant plant. He looked for right ruling, but see oppression, for righteousness, but see weeping. So we see Israel was supposed to be the vineyard. Yehuda, the vine dresser, the one taking care of the vineyard, coming from the line of Yehuda. But what's happened? Oppression. No joy. Destruction. Yirmiyahu 2 verse 21 says, I planted you a choice vine, all of it a true seed. How then have you turned before me into a generate plant of a strange vine? A degenerate plant of a strange vine. Hosea 10 verse 1 says, Israel is a degenerate vine. He brings forth fruit for himself. As his fruit increased, he increased his slaughter places. And the better his land, the better they made their pillars. Now think about that for a moment. In the eyes of the house of Israel at this stage, when everything seemed to be going well, they just kept prospering, but they weren't serving Yahweh. And so when people are bringing fruit forth for themselves and not giving thanks to Yahweh and putting Yahweh first and establishing that this is what it's all about Yahweh, then they're just building their own lives. And you know what? They were doing well, actually. This degenerate plant was actually doing well at this stage, but not well in Yahweh's eyes. Physically, they were growing, so they had to have more high places, which means they weren't worshiping the place that Yahweh had chosen. So they'd resorted to whatever, and following the ways of the nation in corrupt fertility rites, etc. Tehillah 80 verse 8 to 18 says, you brought a vine out of Mitzrayim, you drove out the nations and planted it, you cleared a place for it and caused it to take deep root, and it filled the land. Hills were covered with its shadow, and the mighty cedars with its twigs. She spread her branches to the sea and her shoots to the river. Why have you broken down her hedges, so that every passerby plucked her fruit? The boar out of the forest ravages it, and the wild beast of the field devours it. Return, we beg you, O Elohim of hosts. Look down from heaven and see and visit this vine and the stock which your right hand has planted, and the son whom you made strong for yourself. It is burned with fire, it is cut down. They perish at the rebuke of your face. Let your hand be upon the one at your right hand, upon the son of Adam, whom you have made strong for yourself. And we shall not backslide from you. Revive us and let us call upon your name. Turn us back, O Yahweh, Elohim of hosts, and cause your face to shine, that we might be saved. These are just a few of the similar passages where we see this identity of vineyards, vines, fruitful, degenerate. So then when we come to Yoḥanan 15, it makes sense, the parable that he's given, but without the understanding of the urgent words of prophecy against those who are departing and not staying in Yahweh, they wouldn't understand the words of the Master in Yoḥanan 15. And the Hebrew word for degenerate is bakak. It means empty, completely laid waste, demoralized, devastated, made void, and it means to be in a state or condition of destruction. In other words, a degenerating, withering vine, state of lacking moisture in a plant indicating poor health. In other words, it's decaying, it's dying, it's withering away. You know, we have to understand that this is what Yahweh doesn't want. In Tehillah 128 verse 3, it says, let your wife be as a fruit-bearing vine within your house, your sons like olive plants all around your table. It should be a representation of the fruit of righteousness, abundant fruit that lasts. Israel was supposed to be a fruitful wife, a betrothed bride that continually bore the fruit of righteousness, yet by mixing with the nations, she had corrupted her ability to bring forth ripe fruit. It only brought forth rottenness. If a vine is fruitful, it's beautiful. It's got great worth. But if it bears no fruit, it's utterly worthless. And here in this parable, we see a series of rhetorical questions that Yechezkiel is asking. Rhetorical meaning the obvious answer is no. Is the wood from the vine better than the trees of the forest? The answer is obviously no. You can't do anything with the vine wood. You can't even make pegs with it. It's too weak to hang anything on. You can't make the tabernacle from like the cedar wood that was used. The sole purpose of a vine branch is to bear grapes. And it can't if it's not rooted in the vine. You know, what we see here, Yahweh planted a pleasant vine, but it had become degenerate because it was not being nourished with the truth anymore. And so we see Yechezkiel basically making it clear here, you guys are of no worth. When Yeshua was walking along and he saw the fig tree that had no fruit, he cursed it. And the next day they came, they saw this thing was withered so quickly. Can anything useful be made from the wood taken from the vine? And the answer is no. Can you make pegs from it? No. Is wood from a vine, or is it used for anything after it's been burned? An obvious answer is no. It's more useless than before. And part of the prophecy of Yahweh, it says burning at both ends. So it's not like you can even stop it. This was a very stern parable that Yechezkiel was given, and this announced judgment that was coming. And when we think about this, we understand that what our master was saying as he was about to be delivered up, as he was giving this parable to his taught ones and those that were coming to listen, to basically say, you need to stay in the vine and be fruitful because he is the true vine. Because remember, Yahweh planted a pleasant vine, but it had become degenerate. So when Messiah came in the flesh, what Yehuda was at that stage was not a representation of true righteousness. Here was, if you have a true vine, it highlights that there's a counterfeit vine. There's a degenerate vine, one that might have been planted right, but it's become worthless. Branches of the true vine are expected to bear fruit. Fruit that lasts. And the only way we are able to bear fruit is if we stay in the master. You see, a vine branch cannot actually do anything on its own. We're pictured as branches in our master, even through the design of the menorah in the tabernacle that had 6 branches coming out, 3 from one side, 3 from the other, it's a picture of being grafted into the master to shine the light. If we're not grafted in, we have no source of life to produce. And as we become the branches, we are supposed to spread out, which represents our reach grows so that we can present the fruit of our lives for the esteem of Yahweh to many who need to taste and see how good he is. You know, we know that Yahweh is basically saying, turn back, as he said in Yeshayahu 1, and I'll clean you up. Messiah is saying, if you stay in me, we'll stay in you and you'll bear fruit that lasts. But know this, that even staying in him, it's not a but, it's an assurance. You know, the gardener prunes, and it's necessary. It's necessary to be pruned so that more fruit can come. But if you're not pruned because you're not bearing, you're cut off. There's a difference between being pruned and being cut off. And so we see a powerful witness here of recognizing that when we are bearing fruit, Yahweh will discipline us. And sometimes that pruning can be a bit painful, you know. Sometimes it cuts a little bit deeper than we'd like it to, but it's for good reason, because he disciplines those he loves. But if we, as Hebrews says, allow discipline to have its work, we will be able to bear the fruit of righteousness that lasts. And so when we tie in all these things into recognizing these words of our master, we cannot actually look only at Yoḥanan 15 without understanding Yahweh's judgment on a vine that he had planted and the state they were in, to what Yeshua was calling for here in Yoḥanan 15, because he was calling for a restoration of being rooted and grounded in love. Now we understand when Yahweh asks this question, how have you become a degenerate vine? Our master also gives a parable, not on a vine, but it is a farming parable, which is the wheat and the darnel. And while men slept, an enemy came and sowed darnel. And this is a picture again of what happens when people are asleep to the truth. They don't have that garden or that hut in the vineyard, guarding the vineyard, They are allowing the enemy to come in and do whatever and poisoning and weakening the state of the vineyard, bringing about degenerate fruit that is not worth to be brought in thanksgiving before the master. We are to be bringing fruit to perfection, and so therefore we understand that our lives should be striving for perfection. And when our master says, stay in me and I stay in you, that's not just that's a nice thought. It's in the context of recognizing what happens when you don't stay in him, when we look at the prophets, when we look at the clear words of warning, of judgment. You see, there's a difference between the discipline of Yahweh and the judgment of Yahweh. We want his discipline so that we can actually bring fruit to perfection. We don't want his judgment because we didn't even present an offering of fruitful living before his face. So we need to be a people that recognize that we're called to be fruitful, not fruitless. And this parable of the vine that we look at in a broader perspective must encourage us to stay in him. And when you stay in him, you picture the scene. He uses a lot of farming imagery in his parables, and trees are used a lot in the parables, likening men to trees that are, planted by the waters, trusting Yahweh, bearing fruit in season. So then we see the vine is a sort of tree too. It's just got a specific purpose, and it's representative of the life in the master. But when you are in, and a branch is grafted in, which we are in the master, and we in him, we have no other purpose outside other than being in the master. So therefore we have no need to be seeking alternative root systems or sources of life that's not life at all. And so we have the joy and ability to bear fruit. Shaul reminds us, he says, we've been set free from sin, and having become servants of Elohim, you have your fruit resulting in set apartness, and the end, everlasting life. You see, the end is not being cut off because we bear fruit of set apartness. But if we're not bearing fruit of set apartness, you'll be cut off and thrown into the fire, because that's all that vine branches are good for. It's not even good to bring about a fire. It burns up so quickly, it can't even help you make a barbecue or a braai, Any thoughts on these passages? I kind of combined Yoḥanan 15 and Yeshayahu 15, which I always like to do, and I think it's so important that we understand why we do that, because without the parallel passages together and linking it up with Yeshayahu 1 and all the other prophets that we looked at, Yirmiyahu and Yechezkiel, in speaking of Yahweh, referring to his set-apart bride as a vine, we can never understand the renewed writings of the words of our master, which is what people struggle with. Isn't that the fact? Okay, so I spoke earlier about Moshe giving, when we looked through Devarim 1 to 3, he was giving a historical perspective and what happened when they came out, and those that were appointed that had wisdom and understanding. And it's with that in mind. Sometimes people say, why are we reading this passage from, why are we reading 1 Timothy 3 verse 1 to 7, some might say, and it's in context with what we looked at when Moshe was giving the witness of what took place in the wilderness, when Yahweh sought for those that were able to be leaders and help govern the people that Moshe was called to lead. So let's read 1 Timothy 3, verse 1 to 7, I think it is. Let me get the mic on there. Okay.
Trustworthy is the word. If a man longs for the position of an overseer, he desires a good work. An overseer, then, should be blameless, the husband of one wife, sober, sensible, orderly, kind to strangers, able to teach, not given to wine, no brawler, but gentle, not quarrelsome, no lover of silver, one who rules his own house well, having his children in subjection with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how shall he look after the assembly of Elohim? Not a new convert, lest he become puffed up with pride and fall into the judgment of the devil. And he should even have a good witness from those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil.
Okay, so here's just a clear summary of what we look at the kind of people that Yahweh defines as wise and understanding, that are able to actually lead others. What we see in a broader scale today by many sources is that there are people who are assuming positions of so-called authority over others in the word, but yet they're not even coming close to the qualifications of being able to be wise and understanding and lead others. Now, many might have the desire. That's what he's saying. If a man longs for the position, I mean, many want to be in this position and lead, but you know what? He was making it clear, as Timotheus was going out into Asia, and Asia Minor, Turkey region, and everything else, spreading the good news, you know, people were coming to it. You had to, like Moshe couldn't handle everything, so too he was saying, okay, we can, but just be careful how you let people get taught. You know, and as I've mentioned a number of times today, with the advancement of technology, it's almost like I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. It feels like the more that you see it, it's like everybody's presenting themselves as a teacher kind of thing, or if you want from a scriptural perspective, as an overseer. Now, what we also take note of here is what many might get offended by, but an overseer is a male. Because we understand it's the responsibility of taking leadership over others in the word. And while we are not here trying to be sexist in any way, what we see is what our master called to equip the body is all offices that are filled with men. An overseer is a male. He's to be the husband of one wife. So we do see here this prevents an opening of Isabel to take place. And why I say that is because in a corrupted worship system over the last 50, 60 years, we've seen females taking lead roles in governing people in the truth of the presentation of the truth of the word. And that is an opening up for Isabel to bring in corrupt worship. And so we also take note that an overseer, you know, there are some presenting themselves, teaching others, but yet their wives are not submitting to the word. Then you disqualify yourself as well as another aspect. And a lot of people also, when we look at this, again, this wheel within a wheel, because the next passage goes on to deacons, which might be a little bit, it's almost like, okay, somebody is not quite an overseer, he's still learning, so deacon and likewise, and then it talks about wives, be reverent. So there's a standard of order that Shaul is teaching Timotheus that needs to be in the body. But we also understand that the qualities that are required of an overseer is supposed to be an example for the rest of the body, correct? Because we should, when Yeshua says a taught one is not above his teacher. So that means when people say, oh no, I'm not an overseer, so I don't need to not be given to wine, so I can drink. No. You're not better than your teacher or overseer. You should be like them. Hebrews says, obey those leading you. Follow the example of their way of lives, because that's the pattern ultimately. You know, this isn't a limitation for who's allowed to. I'm using an example because we've had it in the past where people say, no, I can drink because it's only for overseers and deacons, so I can have my glass of wine. They're missing the whole point. It just shows you the immaturity that's in it. Did you want to share something? So when we look at this, we've got to understand here that these qualities that he's talking about here, this is about being sober, sensible, orderly. I mean, I can go into all the Greek words here and spend another couple of hours going into this, but it really is about operating in Yahweh's order to make sure there's order in the house. And when there isn't a proper structure according to Yahweh's design, because it all comes back to Yahweh's design for his building, which we are, his tabernacle. And we don't follow that order, it starts, if the head is sick, the whole body is sick. And that's what Yeshayahu 1 showed us here. when Yahweh was saying from the head to the toe, it's all sick. Why? Because they didn't have people in position. When you look at Malachi, you look at Micha, you look at Amos, you look at all the prophets and priests had become corrupt. Nobody was teaching the Torah anymore. It was, don't prophesy to us false truth, prophesy falsehood, tickle our ears, giving the people what they want. That's not a quality of true leadership. You see, true leadership might not always be liked. But it's not about being liked. It's about doing what's right in Yahweh's eyes. And this is a clear witness. What Shaul was teaching Timotheus was basically, when you go out there, make sure that this vine branches that are extended don't become degenerate. But it continues to be fruitful. And the way it must be fruitful, the order must be kept. That's what it comes down to. Anybody have any thoughts on this passage? I mean, it's very clear. A new convert cannot be leading because it's the blind leading the blind, you know. Okay, so that's our readings for today. I don't know if anybody would like to share. I hope, Renee, that you are ishkuo, strengthened to do all in Messiah. And yeah, so I think that's all I have to say today. Thank Yahweh there was no glitches today. Praise Yahweh for that. And we trust that we'd be able to come together again next week as we continue our journey through the book of Devarim and the prophets. And you know, every week it sometimes comes in and some people might find, oh, here we go, listen, it sounds negative, Read through the eyes of the prophets that were writing these things and Shaul's writings and see why these things are written as warnings for us or as encouragements, because when you are actually obeying the word, these words become living words that remind us not to drop our guard for a moment, because the reality of being cut off is real. The reality is real. You know, and so if we don't guard our lives and exercise ourselves in proper reverence before the Master, we do risk being rejected, just as he rejected the house of Israel and those that did not produce proper fruit in him. So our call is to be fruitful, which we have the ability to be. That's the good news. And therefore, it comes down to the choices we make. Do I really want to be fruitful or not? Do I want to put in the effort, or am I still feeding the flesh? And this is things, and if you're still finding you needing to feed the flesh, you need to submit yourself under the authority of those that are going to help you learn to grow up and be mature in the Master, if you want to do that. You can't be forced to obey. Yahweh's never going to force anybody, but he is going to say, if you choose me, I'm commanding you to obey. There's a difference. Because we say yes to the Master, we have a responsibility toward one another to hold each other accountable and uphold one another in love according to his word, and showing no partiality, but one standard. You know, so let's be people that are able to sing the song of Moshe, you know, which is a song of deliverance. On that note, let's pray. Master Yahweh, we bless you and we praise you and we thank you that we can continue to learn more and more about you. Words that we may have heard many times, but yet every time we hear it, it continues to ring true and bring to remembrance what we are to be in you. And I thank you that you continue to make it clear through the mirror of your word how we are to be. And we thank you that you've given us a perfect design, a perfect pattern to follow, that we don't need to question how, but we just need to seek how, because it's been given to us. And we thank you that you continue to strengthen us. We do trust and pray that you'll continue to cause us to be a people that keep shining your light. And we ask that you add to our number, just as it was in the days of the emissaries recorded in the book of Acts, that you would add to our number. We desire to see more people being as hungry and thirsty for you as we are, being as zealous for you as we are, just as we desire to be like Pinchas and Eliyahu were. Master Yahweh, we bless and praise you and thank you that you give us strength to do all. We look forward to a great week serving you in complete set of partners. And as we continue to rest in your Shabbat, will you refresh us, strengthen us, and make your face shine upon us. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen.